Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between green hills, lived a woman named Eniola. Eniola was known far and wide for one thing: her strength. She wasn't just strong in body, she was strong in will and spirit. No man in the village could defeat her. No man dared challenge her, except for one young, handsome man named Adebayo. Adebayo was known as one of the most handsome and brave men in the village. With his broad shoulders and charming smile, he was admired by all the women. He thought he could defeat any woman, especially one like Eniola. One day, after hearing tales of her victories, he decided to challenge her. "Eniola," he said with a bold grin, "I've heard of your strength. I'm here to prove that no woman can defeat me." The villagers gathered around, murmuring with excitement. Eniola stood tall, her eyes locked on Adebayo. She had seen many men like him come and go, and she was not afraid. "If you think you can win, come forward," she said, her voice steady and calm. The two squared off. Eniola was quick and fierce. She dodged Adebayo's first punch and landed one of her own right in his chest. He staggered back, surprised by the strength of her strike. Adebayo lunged at her again, but Eniola was faster. She ducked and, with a swift kick, sent him sprawling to the ground. The villagers gasped. Adebayo tried to stand, but he couldn't. Eniola had beaten him easily. "You may be strong in many ways, but strength alone is not enough to defeat me," she said, her voice low but clear. Adebayo, bruised and humbled, got up and walked away in defeat. But this was just the beginning. As the days went by, word of Eniola's victory over Adebayo spread throughout the village. No man dared to challenge her. But she wasn't done. She sought out other men who thought they could best her. The first was Olamide, a skilled hunter who was known for his strength and agility. "I heard what happened to Adebayo," Olamide said with a smirk. "I think I'll be the one to bring you down." The two faced off in the village square, and the fight began. Olamide moved quickly, launching a series of punches and kicks, but Eniola was quick to block every move, her reflexes sharper than ever. As Olamide grew tired, Eniola found an opening, and with one swift blow, she knocked him to the ground. The crowd cheered as Olamide struggled to rise. "You're good," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow, "but not good enough." But it wasn't just Olamide who challenged her. Next came the blacksmith, Tunde, who was known for his massive biceps and his ability to shape iron with his bare hands. He thought his strength could overpower anyone, but once again, he underestimated Eniola. She dodged his heavy blows and in a final move, flipped him onto the ground. One by one, men in the village came to challenge her, and one by one, they were all defeated. Eniola stood undefeated, her reputation growing even stronger. She became the pride of the village, but with every victory, something inside her began to change. She became more distant, her trust in men growing weaker. One hot afternoon, as Eniola walked through the market, a commotion caught her attention. She turned to see a young girl, Adama, standing by the store, trying to push away a man who was getting too close. The man was tall and muscular, and his friends stood nearby, laughing as he tried to force his advances. "Come on, Adama," the man taunted. "You're too pretty to be single. I'm just trying to help you see the truth." Adama pushed him away again, looking scared but determined. "Please, leave me alone," she said, her voice shaking. The man's expression darkened. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward him. "You will listen to me, whether you like it or not," he shouted. Eniola's heart raced. She couldn't let this happen. Without a second thought, she marched toward the man. "Let her go," she commanded. The man turned, surprised to see Eniola standing there. "Oh, it's you," he said with a sneer. "What will you do? You think you can stop me?" "I'm not asking," Eniola replied coldly. "Let her go now." The man laughed, but his laughter was short-lived. With a sudden movement, Eniola stepped forward, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it until he yelped in pain. The crowd around them gasped. His friends quickly rushed to help, but Eniola was ready. She kicked one of them in the chest, sending him flying backward into a stall of fruit. The other man swung his fist at her, but Eniola dodged and swept his legs out from under him, causing him to crash to the ground. The original man, now furious, lunged at her with a wild punch, but Eniola caught his arm, flipping him onto the ground with a loud thud. The villagers cheered as the three men groaned in defeat. Eniola stood tall, breathing heavily. "Anyone else?" she asked, her voice filled with authority. The men could only shake their heads, too ashamed to speak. They picked themselves up, limping toward the village hospital, where the healer would tend to their wounds. Adama looked at Eniola, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," Adama whispered, tears in her eyes. "You've saved me." Hey, if you're enjoying this story so far and want to hear more captivating tales like this, hit that subscribe button. Share it with your friends to help these powerful stories go viral. We've got more coming, and you don't want to miss the rest of Eniola's journey. So, subscribe now and stay tuned for more. Eniola gave her a soft smile. No one should be afraid to stand up for themselves. No one should be afraid of men who think they can control them. A few days later, Eniola was walking through the forest, gathering firewood, when a group of three men appeared from behind the trees. These men were from a neighboring village and had heard of her strength. They decided they would be the ones to take her down. They thought that, working together, they could defeat her. "Eniola," one of the men called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We've heard you've beaten all the men in your village, but you won't be able to defeat all of us." Eniola stood tall, looking at the three men who had surrounded her. "I don't have time for this," she said calmly. "Leave now." The men smirked and attacked together, throwing punches and attempting to pin her down. But Eniola was quicker. She dodged one punch, then grabbed another man by his collar, spinning him into the other two. They stumbled backward, giving her enough time to land a solid punch on one of their faces, knocking him out cold. The remaining two men tried to grab her arms, but Eniola twisted away, delivering a knee to one's guts. The other man swung a heavy blow, but Eniola blocked it and threw him to the ground. With a few swift moves, all three men were lying unconscious on the ground. Breathing heavily, Eniola wiped her hands and continued her walk, leaving the men behind. They had underestimated her strength and paid the price. The next morning, the village healer would be busy again, tending to the injuries of those who dared challenge her. Meanwhile, far from the village chaos, Durojaye was at his farm, minding his own business. He wasn't one for drama or crowds. Everyone knew that he was always on his own, working hard on his farm, growing crops, and selling his produce in the market. Durojaye had built his life from the ground up, with no need for anyone's help. But the women in the village never seemed to notice him. They were drawn to the more outgoing, more charming men, the ones who had money or who weren't afraid to boast. Durojaye, with his humble clothes and quiet nature, didn't seem to catch their eye. He didn't care. He was content with his work. "I'm always minding my business," Durojaye would say to himself as he walked the land, farming, selling my products. "I don't have time for foolishness. But girls don't like me. I'm just a poor farmer. They think I have nothing to offer." Despite his humble nature, he was lonely. The women who lived in the village had their eyes set on men who didn't respect them, men who only cared about appearances. Durojaye wasn't interested in those games. He was content in his work, believing that one day he would find someone who appreciated his true worth. One day, as Durojaye was heading to his farm, he met Eniola on the narrow footpath leading to the stream. She was on her way to fetch water, and the two came face to face. The path was too narrow for both of them to pass comfortably. "Move aside, please," Eniola said, her voice cool but firm. "I need to get through." But instead of stepping aside, Durojaye bent down slightly, making room for her to pass. However, as they walked by each other, his body brushed against hers. It was a small, accidental touch, but for Eniola, it was like a spark. She felt a heat rise in her chest, and anger bubbled up within her. "You," she began, her voice trembling with fury. Before Durojaye could react, she spun around and hit him on the back, catching him off guard. Durojaye turned quickly, raising his arms in defense, but Eniola was already swinging again. This time, she attempted to slap him across the face, but her hand missed, and in the heat of the moment, they both lost their balance, tumbling onto the ground. Durojaye, now on the ground with Eniola on top of him, quickly grabbed her wrists, holding them firmly. "I'm not going to fight you, Eniola," he said softly, "but I'm not going to let you hit me either." Durojaye turned quickly, raising his arms in defense, but Eniola was already swinging again. This time, she attempted to slap him across the face, but her hand missed, and in the heat of the moment, they both lost their balance, tumbling onto the ground. Durojaye, now on the ground, with Eniola on top of him, quickly grabbed her wrists, holding them firmly. "I'm not going to fight you, Eniola," he said softly, "but I'm not going to let you hit me either." Eniola struggled, trying to break free, but Durojaye was strong. Slowly, he pulled her toward him, holding her in a gentle but firm embrace. The heat between them was undeniable. Her heart raced, and her body shivered at the unexpected contact. For the first time in her life, Eniola felt something other than anger and pain. They stared at each other, the world around them falling away. The villagers who had witnessed the fight watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of it. Then, realizing the attention they had drawn, they both quickly pulled away. Eniola walked off, her heart pounding, while Durojaye stood there, quietly watching her leave. The next day, Durojaye stood at the entrance of Eniola's compound. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands were slightly trembling. No one had ever dared step into this compound before. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, were whispering anxiously. Many feared what would happen to him, uncertain if Eniola would let him live or if he would be yet another man who made the mistake of approaching her. It wasn't just fear they felt though. There was a hint of pity in their gazes as they watched, especially the men who had mistreated their wives. They knew how fiercely Eniola protected herself, and they wondered how she would react to the quiet farmer who had dared approach her. Durojaye took a deep breath, his voice steady yet filled with uncertainty. "Eniola," he began, looking at her from the entrance. "I know I've come uninvited. I just want to talk." Eniola stood silent, watching him with cold eyes, not saying a word. She had always prided herself on her strength, but now, standing before this man, she felt something inside her shift. It wasn't fear, it was a flicker of curiosity, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She kept her gaze fixed on him, silently questioning his intentions. He took a step closer, but kept his distance, sensing that she needed space. "I'm not who you think I am," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I'm not just a poor farmer. I've kept my true identity hidden for a reason, but I think it's time I told you the truth." Eniola raised an eyebrow, not fully understanding what he meant. "What do you mean?" Her voice was low, guarded. "I've been pretending to be someone I'm not," Durojaye continued. "I've hidden my wealth and my status because I didn't want to be judged by what I own, but by who I am. I wanted to find someone who could see me for who I truly am." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've seen the way you fight, the way you stand alone. I've heard your story, but there's something I need to ask you." He hesitated before speaking again, his voice more tender now. "Why do you fight every man who comes near you? What made you so angry?" Eniola's chest tightened. The walls she had so carefully built around herself began to crumble, piece by piece, as she looked at him. This man who stood before her with no intention to fight, but with a quiet understanding she hadn't expected. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, the pain of her past rising to the surface. My father, he never wanted me. He wanted a son, a boy who could take over his work, carry on his name. But my mother gave birth to me instead. He was angry. He made her life miserable for it. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening as memories flooded her mind. He mistreated her every single day, blaming her for having me. And when she died, it was because of him. She was broken, emotionally, physically. She died young, leaving me behind with a man who didn't care for me. The villagers, watching from a distance, exchanged quiet glances. Some of the men lowered their heads in shame. They knew they had treated their own wives poorly. But hearing Eniola's story made them feel ashamed, deeply ashamed of their actions. The harsh reality of her words hit them all at once, and they realized they were no better than the man she had despised all her life. Eniola continued, her voice steady now, though still filled with grief. I went to live with my mother's family after that, but they didn't want me either. They blamed me for my mother's death. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. They thought I had cursed the family. One of my uncles, he molested me. He took advantage of me, and no one believed me. I ran away, back to my father's house, but he was no different. I promised myself I would never let anyone hurt me again. I would fight to protect myself, no matter the cost. There was a long silence after her words. The villagers, once filled with curiosity and fear, were now overwhelmed with compassion. Some of the men even began to look at their wives differently, as if they were seeing them for the first time. Durojaye, standing there, was silent for a long time, absorbing every word Eniola had shared. He felt a deep sorrow for her, a sorrow that spoke directly to the heart of his own quiet pain. He had never experienced the suffering she had, but he understood the weight of it. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He stepped closer to her, his voice softer now. Eniola, he said, his tone filled with empathy, you've carried so much alone. You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to protect yourself from the world all by yourself. Eniola looked at him, her heart pounding. There was something in his voice, in his gaze, that made her feel as if she could lower her guard, just a little. She had never allowed herself to trust anyone, but this man, this quiet, humble man, seemed to understand her in a way no one else had. The villagers watched the exchange from a distance. The men who had mistreated their wives, who had failed to see the emotional weight they carried, now felt guilty for their actions. Some of them bowed their heads, ashamed. They knew now, after hearing Eniola's painful story, that they had not been as kind or as loving as they should have been. Eniola turned her gaze back to Durojaye. You don't know how hard it's been, she whispered. All I've ever known is pain. Durojaye stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. I know. And I'm here now, Eniola. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to fight anymore. Let me help you heal. Eniola's heart felt heavy with emotion, but also light at the same time. She had spent so many years pushing everyone away, building walls around herself, but in that moment, with Durojaye's words, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Eniola's story spread throughout the village. The men who had mistreated their wives were ashamed of their actions, and the women saw her as a hero. Eniola's strength became an inspiration, not just for women, but for everyone. Durojaye, the humble man who had been hiding his wealth, revealed himself for what he truly was. He married Eniola, and together, they built a life full of love and respect. Eniola became a strong voice for women who had suffered like she did, helping them find the courage to stand up for themselves. The village was never the same again. Eniola had found her peace, and she had finally met a man who loved her for who she was, scars and all. And so, they lived happily ever after, Sometimes strength is not about fighting others. It's about facing your own fears and healing from the wounds of the past. True love doesn't look for perfection, but for a connection that is deeper than anything material. If you've been touched by Eniola's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Share this video with your friends and help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Stay tuned for more amazing stories and emotional journeys like hers. We're just getting started, so don't miss out. Subscribe now and keep the stories alive.